Sometimes it's sort of you have to take a leap of faith. I think data always plays in your favor. Start small, grow big, but you can start anywhere you want. AI can do logic, but it can't really do ethics. So look for someone who has that muscle. That nobody likes to look at themselves in the mirror and admit that they have faults, right?
My name is Jochem van Veer. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called TheyDo, the journey management platform for business decision making. We raised over $50 million and are growing globally. Our enterprise customers include Ford, J&J, the Home Depot, and Pfizer. I mean, wherever you look, understanding customers is key to staying ahead. But in order to do this at scale, aligning so many different teams with the customer journey is incredibly hard, but it is possible. I really wish this podcast existed before we started our company because so many companies are organizing around journeys and there's so much to learn. So in order to share what I'm learning, what I'm hearing with our community, I meet with industry experts. And in my video podcast, I'm here to explore the world of business strategy, design, and journeys, customer journeys, to really get an understanding of how leaders are changing their way in their business. So let's dive into the show. My guest today is Tyler Andre. He is at Accenture Song and he's a leader in CX strategy and design. He's worked with top organizations to transform how they approach CX, journey mapping, and service design. Known for helping businesses achieve game-changing aha moments, which we'll dig into today, he specializes in simplifying complex processes, advocating for strong operational foundations, AI-driven CX, which is the juicy topic du jour. And today we'll dig into the right tools, frameworks to create a seamless, scalable experience organization and basically dig into all the work that he is doing. Tyler, it is exciting to have you on. Welcome to the pod.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I want to start with a simple question and let's see where it takes us. So why do businesses tend to overcomplicate CX? I mean, this is my question. You can take it in any way you want. Maybe I'm wrong by leading the victim here, but I would love to start there and get your take on that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I see with businesses is just how they approach the topic of CX. I think it comes down to their understanding. I think the reason they complicate it is because they almost use synonymously the topics of customer service versus customer experience. And as they approach it and they try to move NPS, if you're really focused on customer service, you're not really going to move your NPS. And so they overcomplicate it in that way. And the biggest difference between those two is customer experience is proactive and customer service is reactive, right? So you have a service actor, it's transactional, you have a point in that service interaction where you potentially have a service failure and you have to do service recovery. And so that's why it's customer service and it's reactive, right? So I see a lot of organizations overcomplicate this by designing everything that they do in customer experience, or what they call customer experience, really around customer service. And they don't do enough in that proactive space to try to forecast and prevent. They're always in this reactionary mode, in this firefighting mode. And then they never are able to get it right because they're always chasing their tail to an extent.
Right. So I also like to think that when customer service is employed by a customer, like something is broken in the customer experience, right? But the whole discipline, like CX as a discipline, started basically from customer service, right?
Sure.
It's like the experience you're having through service. So you serve a global client base. You're typically based in New York. Mm-hmm. So there are striking differences between how companies are approaching and their different maturity that they're having. So what has changed over the last few years in terms of how you get an engagement with one of your clients? Like, what is the ask? Like, there is a different level of maturity. There's a different level of skill that they already have when we talk about their foundation. So how have you seen the questions that you are getting, the problems that you're solving for them shift over the last few years when it comes to like driving CX, or basically like coming from the top, asking about customer centricity?
I think the biggest shift that I'm seeing is when the whole world kind of got involved in customer experience, right? And an NPS became a KPI that organizations used to measure success. everybody was looking to be almost a purist, and they were chasing what they thought customer experience is or what they were told customer experience was, right? I think that as organizations have evolved and they've matured in this space and they've learned to adapt to what it is, they kind of start to throw out the rule book and they start to define it within their context, who they are, how they're going to use it, what's best for their organization. So I start to see a lot more hybrid models. I see a lot of models where they kind of create their own version of what they think CX is, and then they kind of apply that. There's some plus and minuses to that, though, right? There's when customer experience is a science, so there is a lot of data and research out there that if you get it right, there's a big payoff for it. But to get that payoff, you have to follow the rules to an extent. You can break the rules or verge, a level left, right. But there's certain fundamentals that you have to always make sure that you're solving for. And so you can't rewrite it from scratch. But I think that's where I've seen a lot of organizations, they shift from using NPS as really their North Star. They've added their own metrics of success, and NPS is now one of them. And sometimes NPS is no longer one of them at all. And then I've seen them do a different combination of mixtures between their customer service and their customer experience type activities to solve what's contextualized for their organization.
So since we're on NPS anyway, what's your take on it? I mean, NPS is dead, right? If you just open any LinkedIn and follow a bunch of people on CX, that's like the headline you would get like 5 times a day. Mm-hmm. And on the other side of the equation, I'm seeing like Forrester research come out and say like there's 80% of enterprise organizations are still a score-based organization, where NPS is one of the main instruments to measure success, type bonuses around. So without giving too much of a biased view on this, like, but what is your take on NPS? Is it dead? Should it stay here? Is it just one of the metrics like you gave in your example? Like, what's your take on NPS?
I think, okay, I'm going to speak from my experience here. In my experience, I think NPS should probably not be a metric you're using today. And this is why. A lot of the metrics that organizations use to gauge success tend to be transactional. And NPS is not a transactional score. There's so many things that you have to do within your environment, in your journey, to move the needle on NPS. And so it's really hard to target. It's really hard to say, I want to improve it by 5 points or 3 points. And so a lot of organizations end up investing a lot in energy, just resources, just to try to move the needle on that. But there's so much in your ecosystem you have to change in order to move that. I think there's better ways to measure your success, and it should be incremental. I think NPS definitely had a point in time where it was useful, and the world needed something to latch on to so that they could even just start kicking this ball and moving customer experience forward. I think where the world is today and where organizations are today, I think you have the freedom to have a little bit of artistic freedom to kind of pick and choose what works for your organization and how you measure success, because it's very different per organization. I see a lot of organizations, to your point, that still use NPS. But it tends to be a thing that you just have, but it doesn't have a lot of validity in your environment, in your overall metrics, because the other ones just are easier to target and easier to move the needle on.
Are you seeing that organizations are actually asking you to get rid of a score-based organization? Is that part of the way you help them actually transform?
Yeah, I wouldn't say score-based. I wouldn't say they're getting rid of score-based. I think that they're being creative on how they're measuring, right? So if you look at kind of certain types of methodologies and concepts that exist in the world, right? So if you go from Six Sigma to Lean to Agile to design thinking to all these kind of things that organizations use, and they use a lot of these to solve some of their customer service challenges, right? And if you start thinking about how you measure quality, right, and you measure certain kinds of what I see organizations doing is kind of pulling from different disciplines and packaging together a metric that they need to measure their success. And I think it's important to measure your success, but I think it's I think in the topic of customer experience, it is an experiential domain. And so sometimes it's sort of, you have to take a leap of faith. You have to sort of trust first, and then you'll get, if as long as you do it and you follow kind of this rule book to an extent, you'll start to get some rewards, and you just have to have faith in the process. So I think that there's a give and take there. I think you definitely need to be measuring something so that you know that you're going forward. But I think that you shouldn't have a hard fast on your CX initiative to measure something, because you do have to kind of start blind, and you'll start to see some rewards regardless if you're measuring or not, organically as it goes along.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same, right? It's ultimately about driving business outcomes, right? Whether it's on the revenue side, on the efficiency side, driving your costs down, protecting your reputation. And I think the CX field as a practice is waking up to like, hey, there's more beyond NPS. Like, we're actually helping the business move forward while serving the customer. So how do you go about setting up a foundation? I think that's a big question. So we're going to break that down a bit. But I want to understand from your perspective, like, let's say an organization is ready to take the next step. They realize like NPS is obviously not the way forward, and they want to have a more foundational approach to delivering customer experience end to end. What are some of the elements to building that strong foundation? And maybe we can pick that apart together and start with some of the more known aspects of it, and then move into like what you have seen, especially in building this transformation work for companies that are maybe not so obvious for people.
Yeah, I think that, when you talk about customer experience and you want to create your foundation on where to start, the trifecta of customer experience is depth, breadth, and consistency, right? And so consistency is your largest denominator in that equation. And, I always use the example, if you go, McDonald's became McDonald's because of operational excellence, right? You went in, you knew what to expect from the brand. You went in every time, you knew it was on the menu, it came out the same every place you went into the world. And so that consistency kind of created that experience for them. And that's the foundation they built their success on, right? And I'd say Starbucks is the same thing. So I think that if you're going to start, you need to kind of unpack those three layers. And there are fundamental things that you do at each of those layers. And so I think that in the first place that I would tell every organization is look inward. So a lot of people think customer experience is always outwardly facing. But I think the foundations of it is that consistency. And the consistency comes down to operations. So you want to look inward and look to see, as an organization, can I deliver on my brand promises, on the services that I'm trying to do? Am I capable of doing those? Are my processes are in place? Am I able to bill people, and my bills are correct when they go out? All those things that kind of go into those operational motions. You want to have your house in order first. And that's the first place I'd tell you to look. Look at that, get all of that standardization in place, because otherwise you're going to invest in all the other things, and it's going to be a house of cards. It's going to come falling down. Because if you don't have that foundation, you would have invested in a lot of the other areas, but you're not going to get the return on it because you're not going to be able to execute on it.
So then we have consistency nailed, and sometimes this can be like 12 to 24 months of hard work to even get that baseline in and get everything connected and standardized, like you said. So what about depth and breadth?
Yeah, so I would say that the next iteration is depth, right? And so as an organization, you have to learn to know your customer, and you have to develop certain type of organizational muscles so that you can scale a CX program, right? So operations is your foundation. You want to get that in place. Then you want to work on things like your employee experience, your customer centricity. You want to learn how to be agile as an organization. You want to learn how to layer in to your natural DNA human-centered concepts, right? How you think about your customer, how you think about delivering value and service to your customer. You need to develop that depth, which is the know me customer phase. You want to add voice of the customer programs, things that allow you to have some research capabilities so that make sure that you are delivering what your customer actually wants and they're happy with what you're doing. So you want to create all your listening posts, all this stuff. That's all your depth stuff. You want to do that really, really well. And then I think your next question is going to be, where do you go to breadth, right? And breadth is the domain that I see a lot as a first step versus a third step, right? And so breadth is sort of a lot of your marketing motions, right? So I see a lot of organizations, they approach CX from really a marketing PR. If I just kind of Jedi mind trick my customers into thinking a certain way or viewing us a certain way, thereby I'll get an improvement in NPS and I'll have a better customer experience. So your breadth is how do you attract, retain, and expand your customer base, right? And you can do that through marketing. You can do that through all front office activities, essentially. But I wouldn't start there. You have to have all the other things in place before you can really reap the rewards of that. And so that's the advice I'd give to organizations is start inward first, and then you're going to slowly start looking outward. And when you climb to the top of that maturity curve, you'll be completely outward, and that mainly sits within a marketing function.
I love that perspective because that's indeed consistent with what I'm seeing, right? It's like, oh, let's be fancy, lipstick on a pig CX, where we're going to be like out there and talking about how great we are. Like, and then our customers do strongly disagree with us. So starting with the consistency, starting with the foundation work, basically, is what you're saying. But how do we go about an organization that's not ready to hear this, that they don't believe that this is actually the problem? Like, how do you approach that, changing their minds and showing them that this is actually the order that we should be taking?
Yeah, that's a very painful process. Nobody likes to look at themselves in the mirror and admit that they have faults, right? And I think there's a lot of organizations that are that way, and a lot of C-suite that just aren't ready to take that hard look at themselves and how their organization is run. I think it's a prove it to me situation. I think, and then this is where data plays into your favor, right? I think, if you look at the role of what a chief customer officer does, that's one of the roles that a chief customer officer does is they should, in order to be effective, they kind of have to be sanctioned and blessed by the CEO and empowered to do their role. They need to kind of exist on that same C level as the rest of the C-suite to have that same level of control and power or clout within the organization. And then one thing that they need to do is to be able to go out and look at what the organization is doing, which of their departments or their silos or whatever you want to call them is failing and where they seeing pain. And they need to quantify that and take it back to those business leaders. And you have to advocate for change. It's hard for C-suite to refute numbers. If you give them a lot of sort of the sentiment analysis and sort of those types of things, which not everybody buys into the value for that. But if you show them hard numbers, particularly anything you can quantify to an extent, they tend to start to believe, and you can start to soften their approach to it and get them to kind of buy into what you're trying to do.
Such an undervalued part of it, right? We over rely on our metrics, on our data, but it's usually like everything that we can measure, from behavior analytics to business performance. And then the experiential is so hard to gauge and understand. And today we start to quantify that, and all of a sudden we're leveling the playing field. So I want to come back to that, but not before I clicked in on something else that you said earlier on human-centered language and bringing that into the depth aspect of actually the inner workings of your company. Can you speak to me about how that changes, let's say, the decision-making processes, the strategic review sessions, the monthlies, the quarterlies, like how you have seen organizations that are successful actually adapt that into these rituals that are typically like very business or product-centric and moving that into more like a human-centered way of doing business?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an essential component of a CX program is developing that organizational muscle. I think, though, when doing so, you have to meet the organization where they are and certain organizations have different capabilities in different ways, right? And so you kind of have to meet them where they are to take them forward on that journey on being human-centered, right? So what I hear a lot from organizations is I walked into organizations where the people really cared about their customer. The corporate culture, the people, they were all in. They drank the Kool-Aid, they believed in it. Where they failed is nobody knew how to actually put the customer at the center of what they were doing. No one knew how ways of or methodologies that you would use to think about that. And I think that that's where layering in human-centered design concepts help you, right? It helps you understand your customer, walk a mile in their shoes, so to speak. It helps start to frame your mind in the way that you think about the work that you're doing. And as a result, it changes what you do, right? It changes how the work is completed as you layer these things in. One of the largest companies in the world, IBM, they're famous for this. They kind of started the push for human-centered design, and they kind of made it an initiative as an organization that they were going to put it everywhere. So they kind of use it in HR. They use it, for internal meetings. They use concepts of it in almost everything that they do. And they kind of put it everywhere, and they saw a lot of value out of that, right? So it helped save them. It's one of the things that was attributed to saving them from bankruptcy way back when. And so I think when organizations start to think in a different way, you'll change your behaviors, and you need to think in the right way towards your customer, and human-centered design helps you do that.
So what are some of the other ways that help you execute the how? Because talking about it, we're customer-centric, and then, we ask our customers and they tend to still disagree. So where the rubber meets the road, can you give some examples of other ways that this actually plays out? And like you said, at IBM, they brought that into HR, they brought that into different departments. But how can people listening to this that want to do it, that are drinking the Kool-Aid, but they don't know where exactly to start applying the how? What are some of the tools or frameworks that you find useful to implement, and you've done so successfully?
Yeah, I think you have to unpack some of what human-centered design is, right? So if you think about the concept of personas, a lot of people spend a lot of time on developing this rich, multidimensional persona, but you have to realize what a persona does for you. All a persona does is start to contextualize and put a face on your problem. And the research shows if there's a face on the problem, you're more likely to be vested in solving it, right? So you give the persona a name, you give them a backstory, they have this many kids, this family, this is a job that they do. But all you're doing is contextualizing the problem, and you're making it human, right? And so your teams are more vested in solving, Sally's problem, whatever your persona's name is, right? And so I think that if you have a corporate culture who's disconnected from your customer, and they're too task oriented, they go down a checklist. This is the 5 things they have to complete today, and it's disconnected from the value that they're delivering. I think personas is one of the hows. Start getting your people to think about their customer as a person, with a real human emotion that they need to solve for, right? And contextualize that for them. I think another tool that's very valuable in human-centered design is the concept of think, feels, does, right? If you go through and you do mind mapping exercises, and you try to put yourself in the shoes of someone else, and you start to think about any problem that you have. Okay, what is the other person thinking? Okay, now let's associate an emotion to that. How is this making them feel? And if you can answer those 2 components in that equation, you can usually predict or change how they act and what they do, right? And so if I can neutralize the emotion, I can neutralize or change the direction of what they actually do. And so I think that's a good tool to use within organizations. And I think the third one that I like for organizations that just they're doers and they like to get their hands dirty is low fidelity prototyping. I think there's a lot that can come out of just playing with things and learning as you play, and testing a concept or an assumption that you have about a concept, and hearing feedback from that, and then being forced to kind of iterate on that. And I think prototyping does that really well. I think that's useful. I think those are the top 3. There's obviously a lot more that I use, but I think those are the top 3, depending on the climate of the organization and where their corporate culture is that I think are useful.
Right. But we have to set some boundaries, right? I've seen organizations that can spend a whole year on like developing personas, and everyone's super engaged and it's very useful and everyone is doing that. But at the same time, they're forgetting that the business is running, the customers need things, and they are busy with, is it a need-based profile? Should we think about it as a female? Is it a male? Like, I don't know. And you have like all these like committee decisions almost that aren't really doing any good for what you're trying to achieve, right? Is what you're saying. It's like humanizing the problem, like putting a face to the problem to really help the business move forward. So sometimes that can be like one of the pitfalls that organizations fall into because they learn something new and it's fantastic as a concept, but then because it's an enterprise organization, they allow 100 people to be part of the process and it dies somewhere along that journey. Is that fair? Have you seen that as well, or am I?
No, I absolutely
exaggerating.
I mean, there's a lot to be said for analysis paralysis, right? And and what I see a lot of organizations do is they over-engineer everything. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff isn't as complicated as organizations try to make it to be, and they try to over-engineer the solution or how they're trying to solve for that customer problem, right? I mean, if I've seen organizations, the customer complains that there isn't a water fountain. And so they unpack their persona, they go through the whole thing, and they're like, okay, I need to create a water filtration system. I need to onboard 5 people to run this system. I need to make sure the water is at a certain temperature. And all the person is thirsty and they want a cup of water, just hand them a cup of water, right? You don't have to go through all the other motions. So to your point on the personas, I agree with you. When you do personas, I think too many people, and I'll probably get in trouble with this from my design thinking friends in the world, but I think there's too much emphasis put on personas. You shouldn't spend more than 10, 15 minutes thinking about your persona and the dimensions of your persona. You don't need to do a lot of ethnography. You don't need to do a lot of research on that individual and the backstory to contextualize that and kind of have enough information that you need to move to the next step. So I definitely agree. Don't spend a lot of effort there. Don't overanalyze. Just start to put a face to your problem. Just try to make it real for your people to solve. Once you're at that point, move forward.
If you're enjoying this conversation, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave a review. It makes all the difference. The Experience Edge podcast is where I interview business leaders, CX pioneers, and the best designers who share their insight on creating business impact, having an edge on the customer experience. Do you want more exclusive content and behind-the-scenes access? Check out the Experience Edge podcast on YouTube and LinkedIn so you don't miss a thing. Now let's get back to the conversation. Right. So while we're ruffling some service design feathers, let's continue on the topic of journey mapping. One of those other tools that is like, it was that, and now it's back, and now it has a different notation, and maybe also a nice segue to come back to the data point that we marked to get back on. One of the other tools, journey mapping, blueprinting. What's your take on this? Should we take it the same way? Should we not dwell on it too long? Should we just map it out and continue the process? Or is it actually the cornerstone of change? How are you seeing journey mapping? And maybe also let's talk and weave into the topic of data, because my perspective is, while journey maps, blueprints are wonderful tools, especially for service design, the business doesn't trust them when they're not backed by data and they can't see what it's based on. In many cases, right? It's a beautiful way. It's a beautiful artifact. We can rally together around it. People will cheer for it. And then it's like forgotten the next day. So how are you thinking about journey mapping? I'm sure you've done a few in your career. And how are you seeing that shift going on?
Yeah, I think journey map is like your basic 101, right? That's my take on journey maps. Journey maps only represent your front stage activities. And so it's only going to give you so much information. I think a lot of organizations overemphasize the importance of journey maps, right? They think if they just do a journey map, they understand that journey map, they can solve the problem. But the reality is you can't really solve a problem with just a journey map. You can't re-architect anything. You can't act any change within your environment. It doesn't have enough information. It's just a one side of a coin. And what you really need to change something is really the next iteration of that, which is the service blueprint. So I find service blueprints infinitely more valuable in whatever you're trying to do over what a journey map is. And so I think don't spend a lot of time on your journey maps. That would be my advice. Spend more effort in understanding both your front stage and your backstage activities, which is what your service blueprint does. And it'll give you a lot more value and help you point to a problem and how you're going to solve it a little bit more with a little bit more precision. But to your point, I don't know if I would go as far as say they're not valuable. I think that service blueprints are definitely valuable still today. I think a lot of organizations, they are an artifact that you can create and you can tell a story around and you can rally your department heads or your C-suites toward, right? Because you can point to and say, here are the 5 areas where we're falling down and this is why. And just being able to make that awareness within the organization is sometimes really valuable, and that could be your catalyst for change. So I think just to be able to get an organization there, it's a useful tool. On the data side of it, I think data always plays in your favor, right? And I think that what I see the most that has the most credibility is customer data, right? So I think about voice of the customer programs, where you put your listening posts, your surveys, all those types of things, your CSAT scores that come in. Executives like those a lot. They can wrap their mind around that really, really easily, and it hits home. It hits home really quickly. So I think that there's a time and place for every tool that you'll use or anything that you need to do to solve that. It's a journey. It's a phased sequence approach. And I think they all have value at different points in time. But I think you need all of them, not just one of them. But I think the more data that you have to tell your story, to show the magnitude of your problem, the more buy-in you're going to get from your C-suite or your executives, and the more they're going to invest in solving that problem.
And Tyler, when you say phased sequence approach, like what is that phased sequence approach playing out in your mind? Like what are you referring to?
I think that organizations, again, a lot of organizations, they start with journey maps. That's usually where the first thing is that they start, right? That starts to give them a little bit of fidelity, but it doesn't give them enough, right? The next phase that they typically do is they take the journey map and then they map it to their backstage activities and they do service blueprints, right? That gives them it brings it a little bit more in focus. Then you want to anchor that with data, right? And so then that's your voice of your customer programs, that's your survey data, that's listening to, ears to the ground, listening to what's happening within your business and what's happening with your customers. You want to overlay that with your service blueprints or the things that you thought you learned from your service blueprints. Because the great thing about human-centered design is one of the concepts of it is it's action-oriented, but it tests your assumptions and it challenges your assumptions. So I've been in a lot of meetings where a lot of executives have built these journey maps or the service blueprints, and they said, "I got it. Pain's right here. I can point to it." And then I've been in some situations where live, we're in that room, we call one of their customers and we put them on speakerphone and we ask them, "Is this your pain point? What would you say?" And they give you something completely different. And then the faces of these executives turn white, and they don't know what to do. So I think that it's a journey that you go on. You have to go on it with an open mind. You have to go with learning, a spirit of learning, because that's what it is. You're going to get different levels of fidelity as you go and different understanding as you layer in different tools. But the end road of everything that you're going to do is data. Your data is going to tell you the most. And your data is usually your customer data, it's your operational data, it's your organizational data. It's how much revenue did we lose this quarter, right? Versus what we had last quarter and why. How many times did we couldn't get product out because the assembly line or whatever broke down? Those things you can quantify, right? And you can associate that and layer that on top of your customer data, layer that on top of your service blueprint, and then it starts to all come really, really into focus, and you can really be really prescriptive about how you want to solve that problem.
Right. So what you're saying is basically start with a journey map, turn it into a blueprint, but anchor it with data, because I think like what you said in your example is striking, right? We have this one pain point. We all thought that was the one. And then we call the customer and we realize they need something else. But if you quantify the pain point and you can say like this one is coming up from all the different sources, from VOC, from our support calls, from our analytics that we're taking, really quantifying it as like, this is the massive thing in this particular blueprint. And then the chances are when you call a customer that they are actually experiencing that as something frustrating or blocking them from making progress. But in, I don't know, traditional journey mapping, that was just NS5 where we interview a bunch of customers and that's that, then we would miss the mark way more. So basically once you have that in place and then layer also your metrics in, then you have the complete picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you definitely want to start small, grow big. Because your organization is also going to go through a maturation as you go through the steps, right? These are tools that a lot of organizations are starting to learn to use. They're starting to learn to think in these ways, so they're not used to them or comfortable with them. So there's a curve that you have to go on. You can only bend someone so much so fast before they break, and so you have to be iterative and you have to do small increments.
Yeah. So one of the pitfalls there is like start too big, right? It's like customer lifecycle. We're going to break it down in all these journeys and blueprints, and we're going to have a massive overview. And then we're doing again the same as with the personas. We're spending 12 to 24 months on like mapping it all out, understanding it while the business is still on fire and the problems are remain unsolved. So how do you go about picking the right points of entry? Like how do we know where to start? What is the journey? Where does the journey start and end that we should be focusing on? Like what's your framework of thinking on how to pick the right places to start this end-to-end work and actually get results so that you can actually do it again? Start small and scale fast, or what was it? Grow big, as you said.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer to that. I don't know if there's a good definitive starting point or end point. I think it depends on where you are as an organization. The thing that I think that the other thing that I see a lot is a lot of organizations, everyone likes to feel like they're unique, right? We're unique, I'm special, and organizations feel that they're different than their competitors or they're different from somebody else within the industry. And the reality is when you talk about certain types of problems, they're repetitive. I can't tell you how many organizations I've gone into and one of the biggest pain points that I see is usually the handoff between sales and service, right? There's not enough information that's passed along to be able to service that customer. So you have someone who's kind of sold the dream, and then you have the service that's kind of delivering, servicing the nightmare, right? And so that's always usually a failure point that I see in a lot of organizations. And so I think that when you think about where to go, you have to kind of look within contextualize kind of where you are as an organization and what your pain point is, right? What do you have to do to solve for anything that you're trying to do? And so your starting point can be anywhere almost, right? If you think about the affinity loop that kind of represents what design thinking is, it is an infinity loop for that very purpose, because there is no it's not linear. There's no one start point. You can jump into the loop at any point. The rule is you have to finish the whole loop, but you can start anywhere you want, and you're still gonna, as long as you finish all the cycles, you'll come to the same result at the end. And so I think organizations need to do that, right? They need to go through the process. They need to trust the process, but they can start wherever they want. But you can course correct as you go along.
What is the hardest part of doing all the steps in the loop, or like all the phases in the loop, if you will? Because let's take the pre to post sales handover, right? We're selling something and then we need to service it. So that's a sales efficiency problem. It's a revenue problem. I mean, if the customer ultimately churned, then we spend all this acquisition cost for nothing. So quantifying that is not the forte of the customer experience function typically. Mm-hmm. So we need peers in business. So it's easier to start with, let's start with the customer where they have problems, what they are seeing. But then we might ultimately not even get to quantifying the business outcome because we're so far in the process. Like there is some nuance into where to put emphasis on. So how do you think about it? Am I in your mind stating the right problem with this approach of like, yes, the rule is you have to go through it, or am I off here? Because my take on this is like you have to start almost like from the business. Okay, how do we measure that this problem actually exists in terms of lost revenue, churn, whatever it is, and then work backwards from there to the customer, which is an odd take on customer experience sometimes. So how do you think about weighing like the different starting points, potential starting points?
Yeah, so I have two theories of thought on that. At the end of the day, any good customer experience practitioner can meet you where you are and then scale you, and they can zig and zag with you, right? So the jumping into the loop or just starting at any one point, they'll meet you where you are, they'll start where you want to start, and then they'll help you evolve and mature, right? So I think you can still be successful that way. I think though that you touched on a topic which is the difference between kind of your customer experience people, your customer service people, your operations people, your service designers, right? Because they all are going to approach a problem with certain dimensions and certain capabilities, and they bring certain levels of data to the conversation, right? And so you want a balanced approach. I think, though, one of the things that I'm seeing in the industry is this concept of a business designer, right? So a business designer is basically just a service designer, but it's like the 2.0 version. So they can do everything a service designer does, but they have the business. They usually have an MBA or something where they have business acumen, or they're able to associate and they understand how businesses operate, how departments function, how they make money, how their P&Ls work, and they're able to associate what they see in those service failures and what they need to solve for and quantify it within those business terms to be able to speak that language. So I think when you're trying to do a robust, mature customer experience program, make sure you have somebody, whether they're a technical business designer or not, have someone in the room that has that capability to be able to translate and go across those domains, because you need that to be able to speak to your business to solve ultimately for the problem that you're trying to do. Again, at the end of the day, data is your friend. But the data means nothing if you don't have the right person that has the capability to translate it across those domains so that everybody can get on board.
So service designers trained and doing an MBA later versus MBA students out of college and then later bolting on human-centered design or service design. Which one are better business designers?
I think they're both. I think they're both. I think that the thing, though, that I would say, there's some pitfalls, right? So if your core is service design and then you got an MBA, what I see a lot is those types of individuals tend to be a little bit more purist about their service design, and what the business side of that will tell you to be is not to be so purist, and so that's like an internal struggle that they have, like trying to fight one versus the other, and you have to solve for that in order to be successful. I think if you get your MBA first, you sort of already have the business in mind, and then you can translate it a little bit easier to the service design aspects. And so you don't have so much of that internal conflict of being that purist in the service design space. But I think both, there's no right or wrong path. I think both can be successful. You just have to, it's a muscle that you learn, it's a capability, it's a competency. As long as you know how to think in the business terms and then translate it in a human way and kind of in an experiential way, and then be able to connect those dots across, you'll be successful.
I'm going to switch topics a little bit. Where is your mind going with AI? Obviously, AI will completely change customer service. And when people mistakenly think customer experience is almost the equivalent of customer service, they're going to say AI is changing everything. But hearing about, let's take the business design lens, if you will. How are we seeing AI completely changing the game for the customer experience work we are talking about right now. So maybe you can give examples of how you are implementing AI and data analytics and using capabilities out of the box, custom built in your work with clients, or how your clients are adopting it. What's your take on the state of today, and where do you see this going?
I think AI is an interesting topic because it's just evolving so fast. I think, how I would describe AI in a customer experience space is it's kind of like quantum physics almost. It's like quantum computing because it's able to take a lot of data points and translate it very, very quickly and making meaningful insight out. So if you think about, a lot of organizations have big data, and organizations love their big data, but they have so much data they don't even know what to do with it, right? They can't parse all of it. They can't synthesize it. They can't turn it into anything. It's just so big. It's so massive. And so then you have, your what's called deep data, which is your insights, all the things from the human-centered design. And so you have to have, those are two sides of different coins. And you kind of have that. The great thing about what AI does is AI helps you synthesize those two together and bring those two houses together very, very effectively and very, very quickly. So if you think about listening posts that you have in place today, they're able to take that information and in real time help you make a decision to help your customer change the trajectory of that experience very, very fast and very quickly. It doesn't have to be, it no longer has to be data that you analyze and it's laggard data, right, that you look back on. And then you're like, okay, going forward, I'll fix that so the next person doesn't have that. It allows you the capabilities to synthesize stuff in real time and then react to it in real time. And so that changes the game because you no longer have to wait to synthesize. You're synthesizing in the moment, and because the AI is helping you be directive in that approach, it helps you be more proactive, which is really what you want to be able to do. And then you can course correct very, very quickly, and that helps you as an organization.
Do you expect the business designer to take on the role of using AI for the deep data? Or do you think that will be still part of data science and we need them as peers to actually do the analytics and the deep work on getting the right insights?
That's a difficult question.
I know, like I'm scratching my own itch. I'm figuring out the answer as we go.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I know the answer to that. I think the most successful customer experience team. So I'll go back to these don't exist as so much. I don't see a lot of chief customer offices anymore. And that's mainly because I think organizations don't really know what to do with them and how to properly run them as a function. But if you look at the successful ones, they usually have a couple components, right? They usually do have a data scientist that's part of that team. They have somebody that's able to tell the story with that data. You have someone who kind of has all the political capital and all the political relationships that everybody trusts, that they can kind of go into their house and say, hey, you're kind of broken, you need to fix this. This is what we're seeing. You have somebody who, people that run your voice of your customer, right? Who understand how to run the machine, do your surveys, do your sentiment analysis, create the reports for that. As well as your CSATs and all those other types of things. So you need multi-dimensional capabilities and in order to bring that all together. And then you kind of have to have that layer, that sort of subject matter expert that can kind of take it, synthesize it across all of those different functions, turn it into something from a business perspective. That would be your business designer. Your business designer could definitely do that. And that could include understanding what's coming from your AI. And then they usually you give it to, this chief customer officer who's that political person, right? Your chief customer officer isn't usually your SME. They're not usually your customer experience expert. They're just the person that people listen to and they're able to advocate for change within the organization. The person usually right under that chief customer officer is the one that is really where the rubber hits the road. That's the important person you have to have in your organization. That can definitely be a business designer. But I think that to your question, AI is such a nebulous kind of topic. I mean, it's such a niche that you have to have somebody who understands AI, how to build AI, how to operate AI. I think your business designer is probably not that person. But I think you need somebody on your team that can answer that and get it to function in the way that you need to make it meaningful for what you're trying to do.
Right. And then talking about like the depth, breadth, and consistency, like where we're now at with AI is like on the breadth side of things, right? Everyone's talking about agents. Everyone is talking about agentic workflows, including in the customer experience space. So off the cuff, like what have you seen? Agents that are actually doing the work, helping you, aiding you, like any of your clients, have they built something that actually is moving the needle for the business when it comes to agentic workflows in, let's say, human-centered design, customer experience, strategizing, basically helping the business make better decisions? Like, what have you seen?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different tools that are out there, right? A lot of AI, there's a lot of agent assist type tools. There's a lot of proactive tools that AI can do. So what I think I'm seeing is there's no silver bullet tool out there. You need a suite of products to kind of do any one thing. But what I'm seeing in the verge of AI is AI is changing how you're able to service your customer. It's changing how you're able to synthesize the data and create a meaningful insight and make it actionable. It's changing the way that it can free up workflows and work streams and take out pain points, so that you can put some of your resources on the other things that you need to do. So it's creating bandwidth and space within your operations that are useful to help solve your customer experience. I'm seeing a lot of people use it for the way that they collect data, right? It's able to collect data in a different way, and it's able to function in a way that is almost in some certain situations very human-like, right? So you can replace in certain functions AI with a human actor, and have a very similar output. And if you want to think about when customer experience first started, one of the big tenets that organizations were trying to do is this concepts of self-serve, right? What AI helps you do is self-serve a lot better, right? So instead of you having to go to a portal or to a web page and find what you need to do and click on it and then read an article, you can kind of talk to a bot or something where it can kind of understand what you're trying to achieve and the goal you're trying to achieve, and it can just give it to you straight, verbally, or direct you to something. And so you're able to self-serve a lot faster, which improves your satisfaction with the engagement overall, right?
If there's one thing that will not change in the next few years, when we take the internal perspective of using customer experience as a way to bring the business together and moving them all in the same direction, like if you could take one thing about customer experience, customer centricity that you believe will not change because of AI, what would that be?
I think AI definitely has its place. I think still being able to understand the emotional side of your customer and the value of that, walking again the mile in your customer's shoe and being able to contextualize that helps you bring into focus the magnitude of the problem you're trying to solve. And I think that AI is not going to be able to do that today or tomorrow. I think you're still going to need that human touch and somebody that gets it, right? That can relate to that problem, can relate to that challenge, and say, the ethics of things. AI can't really do ethics. AI can do logic, but it can't really do ethics. And so you still need those ethical actors within your organization, within your customer experience program, to be that advocate for your customer. Because if you let AI go out on a loan, it can go really rogue really quickly in certain situations.
So last topic for today. You've been with Accenture for a while. How do you think about enterprise organizations finding the right partner to scale these practices, help them get the foundations right and start to build something that is scalable? And of course, I understand you're coming with a biased view, right? I have boutique agencies that are now with AI being able to pull in much more of the work that typically was for the Accentures of this world. So there's a lot of competition coming, and also for customer experience leaders, CCOs, if they have them, or COOs, who we typically see, that want to get help and scaling this? Like, how do they go about finding the right partner and ultimately landing with a firm like yours? Like, what are some of the ways that they should be thinking about it today?
I think you want to think about it holistically. I think what I see a lot of organizations do is they think almost siloed or incremental about the problem that they're trying to solve, not realizing that processes, problems, functions, they cross your silos, right? So when you're trying to solve a problem, don't look for an agency or someone to help you has one competency. You need a collection of multiple competencies to solve usually a problem. And making meaningful impact. So look for someone who has that muscle, that might, that can address your operations, who can address your technology, who can address the human-centered side, right? You need someone who has capabilities in many different spaces to really solve your organizational problems. And so that's the advice that I would give. Look for somebody who's not deep into one area. Look for something who's like a generalist expert, so to speak, in multiple areas.
Almost like a business designer, perhaps.
Almost like a business designer, yeah.
All right. Tyler, thank you so much for being with me today. If people want to learn more about your approaches and perhaps working with you or hearing more about how you work, what will be the best place to find you?
Hey, I'm always out on LinkedIn. Hit me up on LinkedIn. Happy to have a conversation.
All right, Tyler, thank you so much for being with me today. This was great.
Yeah, appreciate you having me. Thanks.
All right, and that's it. Thank you so much for listening. If you found it valuable today, don't forget to subscribe to the Experience Edge on your favorite podcast channel, leave a review, and share it with your team. I'd be delighted. Today's episode was brought to you by Daydo, the AI journey management solution for enterprise. To have an edge on your business strategy and to know why your customers do what they do, visit daydo.com and explore more resources to accelerate your customer experience game. And remember, the journey to creating customer-centric impact never ends, and here's always a new edge to discover in doing things differently. Next week, new episode. Until then, keep pushing the edge, stay inspired. See you in the next episode.